All right, so my name is Laurel Peterson, for those who have not met me yet. I am a professor at Norwalk Community College, and I've had the privilege of running this Writers in Conversation series. I started it before COVID, and then COVID killed it, and then I brought it back to life. So it's been a real pleasure to have a couple of writers join me several times in the year and talk about their work. This evening we have Samantha Keller, who grew up in South Africa and after a decade in London moved to the US, where she completed her MFA at Fairfield University. Her short fiction won the Anthony Grooms Prize and has appeared in the Connecticut Literary Anthology 2024 and Narrative Magazine, among others. Her work has been a Narrative Story of the Week, a contest finalist in American Short Fiction's Halifax Ranch Prize, and shortlisted in the Bridport Prize. Sam's first children's picture book, Are You an Alien?, illustrated by her mother, was published in the UK in 2025. Her novel, The Light Remains, will be published in South Africa and the US in April 2026, like in a week, right? Yes, it's very exciting. Sam works as a freelance developmental director and is an instructor at Westport Writers Workshop and a co-organizer of the 2026 Publish and Pitch Conference. I just reversed that. Jonathan Winn is the founder, co-artistic director, and executive director, that's a lot of hats, of Thrown Stone, where he directed the 2023 world premiere of Seven Cousins for a Horse by Tammy Ryan, and the 2018 New England premiere of The Arsonists by Jacqueline Goldfinger. He performed the role of Danny in the 2017 U.S. premiere of Ross Dunmore's Milk, and Mitchell in the 2019 Connecticut premiere of Cry It Out by Molly Smith-Metzler. He has commissioned 6 plays: An Education by Catherine Yu, The Caterers by Tony Meneses, thank you, Should We Dance Instead by Phoenicia Farrell, Seven Cousins for a Horse by Tammy Ryan, Show Me the Gates of Heaven by Ramon Esquivel, and Gentlemen Hosts by Dana Schwartz. Jonathan is also the author of 3 full-length plays: The Flathead Lake Monster, Fool's Paradise, and Relief Society, and the short play Filament. Jonathan earned his BFA in theater from the University of Southern California and apprenticed at the La Jolla Playhouse. He also holds a master's in user experience, research, and design from the University of Michigan. I'm so sorry. So please welcome them to the stage this evening. Samantha's going to be our first reader. She's going to read for about 15 minutes, and then Jonathan has co-opted us into acting for him, so we're going to perform a short little skit for you, and then I'm going to pepper them with questions, and then you get the chance to ask questions, so please be sure to write down or remember in your head what you'd like to say to them.
Yes, thank you for having me, Laurel, for inviting me here tonight, and to everybody who came, especially all my friends. I'm going to read to you from my new novel, which is called The Light Remains. It's out on April 7th, as Laurel mentioned. It's a story set in South Africa during the apartheid time in the 1950s. So it has a historical fiction aspect to it, and it's a coming-of-age story centered around, my main character, Eve Hunter, who's a young girl growing up on a dairy farm just outside Johannesburg. And it's a story about family and about secrets and the lengths that we will go to protect the people that we love. I'm just going to start at the beginning, because no spoilers. And in the opening chapter, we meet Eve as an adult, and then chapter 2, we go back to sort of the beginning of the story, where she's an 11-year-old with Jack, her neighbor, a 13-year-old boy. So, chapter 1, Allo Afrikaner, March 1975, Malilan, South Africa. In every letter my mother writes to me, she insists that I am lonely. The truth is, I choose to live alone. The difference between loneliness and being alone is as stark to me as black is to white, and I'd make the same choice again and again, even if I was reborn into 1,000 different lives. She tells me that I'm only 30, I'm 31, which is far too young to be living like an old maid with only cats for company. I have dogs. And how on earth will I ever meet someone in the back of beyond? My mother cannot understand that I can live alone and not be lonely, because she is far too intimate with loneliness. She believes that one naturally leads to the other and fears both. Her loneliness was seeded in me before I was separated from her, sown along with the code for blue eyes and light skin in the red throb of her womb. I cannot fear what is part of me. I fold her letter and the envelope with its Surrey postmark into my pocket and warm my hands against my coffee cup before knocking a cigarette out of my pack. I flick a match to flame and draw the smoke deep into my lungs. It is early. The sun has not yet risen, but emissaries of light tip the hills in gold and soften the sky. This is my favorite time of the day, a holy time through which the world moves quietly, not wanting to disturb the gods. I'm careful to extinguish the match completely, wetting my fingers and pinching off the burnt head like my father taught me. This farm, the one that I manage and my mother refers to as the Back of Beyond, is a 5-hour drive from Luswade, the dairy farm where I grew up. From where I perch on the copy of red rocks that rises behind the farmhouse, I can see into the Kruger National Park and catch the occasional glimpse of distant giraffe, reduced to necks and heads as they journey through the acacia trees. I take a slow sip of coffee. Ash drops from my cigarette. I turn my gaze over the neat rows of palms and ferns and the distant nursery where the young plants are seeded. This farm grows exotic plants to improve corporate spaces and enhance expensive houses in the city. Plants grown for people who think of them as decor, who wish to cover a stain or fill an empty space and never really see the living thing that shares their space. But what if trees were our first gods, our first family, rooted in our origins? What if we all began silent and still? Trees are shelter and mantle, lungs and breath, sustenance and medicine. Their unique song hums in our cells and bones, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes joyful, sometimes to offer gentle reassurance. Where people don't always say what they mean, plants are honest and clear, 1,000 voices in chorus with one another. Trees counsel patience and show that time is endless and abundant. If I am very still, I can tune into the slow drip of conversation that travels along the branches, down the trunks, and into the living lattice of roots. From tree to tree, from farm to farm, from this town to the next, across vast acres, carrying me back to the damp smell of willow roots on a riverbank, the dry crunch of poplar bark on a small grave, the sharp heat of burning eucalyptus leaves, and the quiet observance of the oak tree that still stands in the driveway at Luswade and sees everything. Chapter 2, Stick Insect, July 1955. The road from Johannesburg was straight and long and lined to the horizon on both sides with yellow felt. The turn to my father's farm was unmarked. It came up after a small rise with no warning, where the dirt track met the road in a drift of loose sand and stone. On either side of the track, the ground that had been pushed aside in its making was healed over with wide grasses, which had sharpened in the dry winter. The gate was a heavy metal frame with horizontal struts. A hand-painted sign was attached to the frame with a twist of wire at each corner. The sign read, Luswade. It was the name of the Hunt family's farm in Scotland, reused by my father to give our South African farm a sense of beginning and belonging. We heard the car before we saw it. Jack whistled and gestured for me to get down. I grabbed a stone from the arsenal that he and I had been adding to all morning and pitched it in the rubber of my slingshot, then slid into the fort the way I imagine soldiers slid into their trenches, feet first, kicking up dust. The bare skin on my legs stung, but I didn't flinch. Lower, Jack pushed down my head. I elbowed his ribs in reply, but edged my body flatter, and we settled side by side on our bellies to watch the rise in the road like snipers, our breath clouding the winter air. Jack and I spent most of the July school holidays, whenever we could escape our chores, building our fort. We'd scraped a shallow trench into the dirt beneath the barbed wire fence that marked the top boundary of my father's farm, then covered it with branches, adding a final layer of felt grass for camouflage. A fort needed protecting, and Jack and I had spent the morning refreshing our ammunition, a pile of stones the size of peach pips, chosen for their shape and size. The enemy were mostly imaginary, but sometimes took the form of cows, occasionally birds, neither of which we liked to hurt, and our attention was soon drawn to passing traffic. The heavy trucks that ferried men and supplies between the city and the mine, or municipal buses, they were both good targets. When one of us landed ahead, the stone pinged and ricocheted off the metal, smashing into 1,000 bits or shooting down the road with satisfying violence. We'd duck our heads until the vehicle was out of sight, then dance and whoop in celebration. If any of the drivers heard an unexpected sound, it was likely they'd assume the stone had bounced out from beneath the tires, not been launched by two friends with muddy faces hiding in the felt. Usually by the time the stone found its target, the vehicle had travelled some distance away from us. It was a good plan, as long as we didn't get caught. I sniffed and wiped my nose on my sleeve. The hum of an engine grew closer, followed by the sleek shape of a car cresting the rise on the main road. It was pale green and edged in highly polished chrome, with gleaming silver hubcaps and a clean windscreen. This was not a farm car. Jack pushed his hair out of his eyes and whistled a low note of appreciation. Chevrolet Bel Air. The guyman must have given him pause because he stayed low in the fort while I rose onto my knees, pulled back the elastic on my slingshot to full stretch, took aim and let fly. I punched the air at the satisfying ring of contact and tugged on Jack's jumper. Direct hit. Jack didn't respond. He crouched unmoving and I followed his gaze to where the car had come to a halt. As we watched, the reverse lights lit up. By the time the gleaming machine started back towards us, we were up and running. Jack was 2 years older and bigger, but I was fast and panicked. I chased his shirt through the veldt and over the stile into the top pasture, disturbing the Frisian herd who lifted their lazy heads to watch us pass. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the car turn off the main road and judder over the cattle grate onto our farm. Jack sprinted towards the fence, and when we reached the barn, we split up. He vaulted onto his father's farm while I followed the fence towards the chimney smoke coming from our kitchen fire. I skidded through the gap in the weathered bamboo fence my father had built around our kitchen garden and cleared the steps onto the back step in a single leap. The kitchen was empty. Gasping, I leaned against the wooden table with my bare feet flat on the polished concrete floor, trying to still my body enough so I could hear over the thrum of my breath and my heart. The house was quiet. Rosie's voice drifted from the direction of the bedrooms, followed by my sister's reply, then the slip and thud of a sash window closing. The table was set for lunch, and an enamel colander of fresh tomatoes sat in the sink, dark orange and still wet from a recent rinsing. I wiped my hands on my shirt, pushed my hair out of my face, and moving quietly, edged out of the kitchen and into the hallway. A hard knock on the front door landed in my chest. A figure shifted behind the mottled glass, stepped back, then came forward and knocked again. Bang, bang, bang. A face peered close to the glass. I ducked back into the kitchen and slid under the table. Rosie's soft house shoes approached along the wooden floor. She passed the kitchen door with a load of laundry in her arms and glanced at me crouched beneath the table, sweating, ashen-faced, so breathless that I would not have been able to form a sentence, and raised an eyebrow, but kept towards the door. She knew the urgent knocking was about me, knew she was heading towards something unpleasant, yet she did not bother to call my mother, who would not have come anyway. Kate followed behind. She stopped at the kitchen door. What have you done this time? Nothing. I kneeled on the kitchen floor and listened to the driver of the glossy American car shout at Rosie. It was the mine manager's wife, Mrs. Rogers. I knew her from church and both her sons from my primary school. Two barrel-shaped boys with close-cropped hair who started every school year with a shiny pair of new shoes. I crawled out from underneath the table and, still on all fours, taking care to keep out of sight, peered past my sister's legs towards the front door. In the gap between Rosie's body and the door frame, I caught occasional glimpses of a firm bouffant and two white gloves flapping like furious birds. Kate nudged me with her knee and whispered, "You threw a stone at her car?" "No," I made a face as if my sister could never understand the complexities of my life outside the farmhouse. "I used my slingshot." "Oh, that's much better, Eve. Leave me alone." Rosie continued to nod and tut sympathetically. She answered all of Mrs. Rogers' questions and each of her demands to speak to the madam with, "Yes, madam," and "My madam is not here, madam," followed by a slow shake of her head. Rosie always took our side. For once I was grateful that my mother seldom came out of her bedroom. And I imagined her like I was right now, hiding and listening from behind the safety of her closed door. This would upset her, not because I'd shot a stone at passing traffic or that there might be damage to Mrs. Rogers' car, but because she'd be embarrassed. Embarrassed that Mrs. Rogers had come to our house, embarrassed about what Mrs. Rogers would think about us, and embarrassed about what she might say to the other people in town. My mother wanted people to think well of us, especially people like Mrs. Rogers. Kate and I understood ourselves through our mother's eyes and through the eyes of the people my mother admired. If I came home with dirty knees or a torn dress, she'd ask, what would the minister's wife think? If Kate got bad marks at school, she'd say, what would the headmaster think? I had no clue what anybody really thought about what Kate and I did, but according to my mother, they all thought the worst of us. She left our upbringing to these people. They were our cautionary tales, our models, our aspirations, and our warnings in all the places our mother would not be. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Mrs. Rogers spoke slowly as if Rosie was dim. There's damage to the car. She threw a rock. It wasn't a rock, I said, and Kate kneed me in the side again. Yes, madam. Rosie shifted her body to fill even more of the doorway and close any gaps. She denied having seen me that morning. Maybe she's with the master, she suggested, making a vague gesture in the direction of the dairy. I looked down at my hands and scrunched my fingers into fists. I was sorry for it that Rosie was the one who had to face Mrs. Rogers, though not sorry enough that I had to go out there and face the angry woman myself. It was better this way. We all knew there were limits to what Mrs. Roger could do when she only had the maid to deal with. I know who she was with. I saw the Turner boy running away. I'm going over there now. Let's see what his father has to say about this. No, I launched myself up past Kate's leg. Jack had nothing to do with this. Kate pushed down on my head and forced me back into the kitchen. Shush! She mustn't go to the Turners, I said. Tears and real fear rose in my throat for the first time. I gripped my sister's sleeve. He didn't do anything. I promise it was me. Stay here, Kate said, and went down the hall to nudge Rosie aside. Morning, Mrs. Rogers, my 13-year-old sister spoke in the voice she reserved for grown-ups, all clear vowels and airy concern. I'll speak to my father when he gets home for lunch. Of course, yes, I understand. My sister can be wild, I know. Thank you for coming to tell us. She kept up an agreeable patter as she stepped out onto the porch and closed the front door behind her. Through the glass, Kate's distorted shape steered Mrs. Rogers down the path and back towards her fancy green and chrome car, which, thanks to me, now had a brand new chip in its perfect paint job. Rosie bent to pick up the laundry she dropped behind the front door. She stood slowly, keeping her eyes on me. I wiped my nose with my sleeve. She mustn't go to the Turners. Winn and Tomby. Rosie sighed and shook her head. Don't worry about Jack. That boy is trouble. You should worry about yourself. Now go and wash up. It's time for lunch.
There are three of us. Can we do this without the mic?
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're
Yeah.
going to have to pass it back and forth. Okay. Great. So would you like to introduce what
Sure.
we're doing?
Do you want to just quickly go-see-go and have you on the outside and you on the inside?
Sure. Do you want us to stand?
No, we can sit. So this is a bit of an experiment. So how many of you have gone up Route 7 toward Ridgefield and seen the new building go up across the street from Town Hall of Wilton?
Can you hear? Okay.
I watched it go up and I thought it was an apartment building, and I thought they were putting in an elevator shaft, and as they built it, I saw that steeple was on the top of it, and I was like, oh my God, it's a Mormon church. And I grew up in that faith in Montana and left it 30-some years ago. And I, at the time, was working on a program at Yale to develop commercial scripted material. And I was really fascinated with podcasts, and I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and I came up with this idea of women in the Mormon church who don't hold the priesthood, they don't have any ecclesiastical authority, but they do belong to a group called the Relief Society. And I thought, wouldn't it be awesome if there was a podcast called Relief Society, where women try to fulfill the mission of the Relief Society, which is to seek out and help those in need. And I thought, well, who are the people in the world who are most in need? And that's where I got my play. So this is a play about women of the Relief Society attempting to help the children of the Gaza Strip during the troubles of the summer of 2025. Their offer of help ends up going viral because they can't send anything into the enclave. And an offhand comment of, well, my kids have 150 teddy bears, I wish I could send all of them, ends up going viral. And now Allison, the lead of the podcast, has a house full of 120,000 stuffed animals that have been donated. And they've been told on no uncertain terms by their bishop that if they continue this campaign, which has got accompanying death threats, that they will be excommunicated from their church. At which point they decide to press forward because these children deserve to play and they need help. And so this episode of the podcast is their interview of the priesthood authority of Allison's family, her husband. And Mele is her sidekick. Thank you for playing Mele. Mele happens to be Samoan in the piece, but we're going to pretend that she is today. And so we'll just see what happens with this. We've not rehearsed this at all.
So be gentle.
So we'll start at the top of 61.
Ready?
Sure.
Suffice it to say, it's a big punishment in life and after.
For us particularly, church, culture, family, friends, but also career.
And money.
It's not nothing.
No, and again, big shout out to our subscribers.
Patreon.
So, what did you say when he gave you the choice?
Between Gaza and the disciplinary council? Well, obviously I just said Gaza on the pod, so...
Right, so when is your council?
Well, he was actually really cool about it. Offered me a few weeks to think it over, you know.
But it sounds like you've already decided.
I'm biding my time. I obviously couldn't just take that step without talking to Matteo and you, obviously.
Me?
Of course, we're in this together. You got a call too, I assume.
I did.
And did they offer you basically the same terms?
They did.
And what did you decide?
Good segue. Because this gives me the chance to introduce a very special guest.
A long-time listener of the pod.
The longest.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Allie.
So, do you want to introduce yourself, Ken?
Absolutely. I'm Ken. I'm Allison's husband,
Father of my children, priesthood holder, head of the household.
if you like.
I like very much.
Then I like too.
Adorable.
So this episode is going to be a little different, folks. We're getting into very personal territory, but I felt moved by the Spirit to be transparent about this, obviously with Ken, but also with our audience.
Very brave.
Thanks, but I can't take all the credit. Ken was very brave to come on.
Thanks, Allie.
So, just to set the table, Ken is up to speed on the situation. My disciplinary council is scheduled next week with the stake president. And, well, Ken is the priesthood holder in our family, and I've invited him on to counsel me on this decision, which has lifelong, eternal implications for not only me, but for our whole family. So with that, the floor is yours, Ken. Tell us your impressions of what the situation is and what you believe our course of action should be.
Okay, well, first let me say thanks for having me on the show. I am a fan.
Aww.
And not just because it's a good show or entertaining or whatever. I mean, it totally is, but I think the thing that impresses me the most is how you took this thing, this desire you have to do good in the world, something I saw in you from the first moment we met, and you put it into action. Whether that was your work with church welfare, food storage, or the amazing work you did in Africa on disaster relief. You took that love and selflessness that I get to see every day in our family and scaled it. And along the way, you inspired so many people. The boys and I are just so proud of what you accomplished.
Wow, honey, thank you. And just so everyone knows, we didn't rehearse this.
Nope, we're doing it live.
Yeah, well, that's how I really feel. And when the job takes you away or whatever, that's fine too, because not only do we want to support your dream, we know that what you do is important to raise awareness of, when people are in need. And the need is great in the world today.
I'm just so grateful to have a husband who understands that and is willing to sacrifice, and maybe eat a frozen casserole for dinner a few nights a month and get the boys to bed on time so I can do this work.
It sets a good example for the boys, seeing their mom put her faith into action. I've always called them our missionaries in training, and what better example than yours?
You've got a pretty great dad, too.
Oh, shucks.
And I know the disciplinary council is, well, for me, it's devastating to think that our desire to help traumatized and starving children is somehow seen as harming the church's reputation. or worse, going against church doctrine.
But that's not what it's for.
What? What do you mean?
That's not what it's for.
Okay, Ken, then what is it for?
Insubordination, like Mele said before.
Insubordination?
Bishop Bennett was clear. He asked you to,
Suspend, cease, curtail.
exactly, any discussion of the war in Gaza for your safety, for our family's safety.
I understand that.
Do you though? Because in the very next episode, you were right back at it. On an episode entitled Obedience, I should add.
We're trying to obey Jesus.
With full awareness of what the consequences would be for you,
Excommunication,
for our family,
eternal separation.
and you made that decision. And I love you so much. The boys love you so much. And none of us can figure out why. Why would you do that?
I understand.
Okay. Then please, explain it to me. Explain it to the boys, how you could just walk away from everything.
I'm not walking away.
She's not.
Facing the melee.
Sorry.
Children are suffering. Almost 1 million innocent children. I can't look away. More importantly, the Spirit is urging me not to look away.
The Spirit is urging the brethren another way.
Is it? How can that be? To witness suffering on an unimaginable scale, and the Holy Spirit tells these men, what? Don't get involved?
He's bent over the priesthood, Allison.
So what you're saying is, and I want to understand this clearly, I really do, that these men, these priesthood holders, are acting on their divine authority and the urging of the Holy Spirit to order me, on pain of excommunication, to stop trying to help starving children.
Come on, Allison, they can't eat stuffed animals.
They have a right to play.
May they please?
They do.
Fine, but what I'm asking, Ken, is if they say it's because the Spirit or God or Jesus is urging them to stop me, and I testify that the Spirit or God or Jesus is urging me to help in whatever way I can,
Even if it means excommunication.
even if both things can't be true.
No, they can't.
So, if they're listening to the Holy Ghost, you're saying that I'm listening to what?
Something else.
What? Satan?
Something else.
Suffice it to say, oops.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Oh,
That's
okay.
Very brave. No rehearsal?
What's next? All right, well, yay for you, thank you.
Such good sports, thank you.
All right, well, we've ended on spirituality. I was really interested when I read your novel that there was such a strong feeling of like African spirit in there from the land. So let's start there. What role do you think spirituality should play in our lives?
Just a light question.
Just a lot, yeah. So I had one person who came to this who said, well, there are questions at these events and then there are Laurel questions, so it's a little question. Yeah, how do you tackle that?
Wow. I suppose it is a big theme in my book, actually, and
I'm gonna give this back to you.
thank you.
But you got me in the middle after all.
Without it, do it a switch. It's interesting because I think it is an important question. I think we were talking about it the other day among friends, actually, and it's something that I think I do tackle in this novel, but not in a particularly explicit way, because I don't talk about it through the lens of kind of organized religion or institutionalized religion. For me, it's very much about being close to God in nature and finding a connection with something that is unknowable and much bigger than us, and much more guiding and loving, maybe, even when they're suffering, but that it is definitely connected with our relationship to nature, and noticing all the tiny details in the wonder of creation. And then I do sort of juxtapose that against a more formal pursuit of religion, or kind of celebration of religion, and the churchgoers who in South Africa at the time were often the people who upheld apartheid. So there was a strong connection with the segregation in the society and with nationalists and the church, and nationalism and the church. So for me, I wanted to kind of draw those, to expose, I suppose, those two different ways of looking at things. And then, of course, there is more, native ways of kind of celebrating, which is once again connected, I think, more strongly to nature, and finding healing in medicine, in nature, rather than relying on something outside of you to offer that. So yeah, it's definitely something I explored, but without maybe even knowing I was doing it to begin with. And then I could see how it was a theme that was emerging. Yeah, great.
Oh my God. So, I'm not a believer. I guess I could say I'm agnostic. My wife and children are terrified that, because I'm really deep diving on all this stuff, and they're like, "You're not going back, right?" I'm not, but I wanted to explore the space between doctrine and the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, and those who subscribe to that, and those who go along but don't really, and how people who are the true believers are the people in the end who really get punished, and those who are the hypocrites are, like it or not, the survivors, and I wanted to, plays are kind of juxtaposing, opposing forces, right? And sort of these impossible, irreconcilable differences. And I really wanted to ask the question, why can't we effectively help innocent children in this world? Like, what is stopping us from just saying enough? And it's easy to hem and haw and say, well, it's complicated. But at the end of the day, do you believe or not that children are innocent? Every child is innocent. And I've, like in my research for this, I hear some pretty awful things about, well, you gotta understand these kids were always gonna be terrorists. And I just don't believe that, and I don't accept that. And I wanted to weigh in, and I guess the religious tradition that I came up in was sort of the air I breathed for the first 20 years of my life. So I needed to understand it through that paradigm, and not try to speak for someone in the enclave or speak for someone as part of this struggle, because I don't have the moral authority to do that. But I do have the moral authority to say, I live in this world, and I don't believe that what is happening should be happening. And I think that's sort of how I think about spirituality, is like, I'm not a Christian, I'm not a believer, but I really do believe the most radical teaching of Jesus, which is love your enemy.
Thank you. Yeah, you guys got to hold this closer so they can hear me. I read an article in the New York Times this morning titled "Boy Kibble." It's apparently a dish which is defined as, quote, a mess of veg, rice, and maybe ground meat that is eaten all week. Does this sound as disgusting to you as it does to me? Okay. The writer commented that this, quote, represents another hack in a culture obsessed with smoothing away life's frictions. So Jonathan, when we were talking about your play a while back, you commented that you enjoyed making your characters suffer. You might not have said it just like that. That makes you sound like a monster, but writers kind of are. Art doesn't exist without conflict, so I would love your comments, both of you, on the value or lack thereof, from an artist's standpoint, of smoothing away life's friction.
Well, I think if you're going to write good fiction that people want to come along on the journey with you, you have got to fill it with conflict. You have to take, I think Kurt Vonnegut says, you have to take your characters, your nicest characters, and allow horrible things to happen to them. So speaking from a craft point of view, as a fiction writer, conflict is an essential part of what we do, because every time you put someone in a room, you bring someone in to meet them, have them have different ideas about something, your antagonist antagonizes the protagonist, you create conflict, and it drives the action. It builds character. It's an essential part of writing good fiction. So I think it's also, if you're writing fiction, the kind of fiction that I do, which is a way of observing life, you're never going to not be able to include the suffering of life in what you're writing about. You know, bad things have to happen to your favorite characters. It's essential for the fiction itself. But I think it's if you're reflecting life, that is precisely how you do it. You look at a society, you hold a mirror up to it, and you allow that society to reveal itself. And if you're talking about a place like South Africa during apartheid, if you held a mirror up to that and whitewashed it and said it was fine and everybody was comfortable, it wasn't as bad as we thought, it would be a lie. So that conflict is essential to tell the truth and to tell good fiction.
So in some ways, what you're saying then is that without friction, it's a lie, right? Because the perfect reflection is a lie, and that has no friction in it.
In fiction.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm still trying to figure out what the boy kibble is.
It's a mess. It's like, yeah, meat and vegetables and rice all cooked together in this like
Easily made.
thing, yeah, easily made thing. And then they divide it into little containers and keep it in the fridge and take one out every night.
And that's supposed to smooth things over?
Yeah, because then they don't have to think about what they're eating.
Oh, that would create lots of conflict for me. Lots
Me
of
too.
conflict.
Me too, tons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we all want a lack of friction, and yet we live in these lives of intense friction. And I tend to be pretty conflict avoidant, and I was in the process with Fool's Paradise last spring, and my director was working with me. He's like, you got to put these people through it. They got to go through the ringer. And when that was clear to me, I think we had a play. You know, we had a play where somebody has to get sort of refined by the struggle that they're going through. And that's what we want to see as an audience. You know, we want to see the conflict, and we want to see what the person comes out as on the other side of the conflict.
Can I add to that?
You certainly can.
So yeah, from again, I'm talking from a fiction, a producing fiction point of view, but just to build a little bit on what Jonathan said, I think the other thing that we always want to see in our work, whether it's a movie or a book, is some transformation in your character. You don't want them to start and end at the same place.
Right.
They need to develop along the way, and they often do that by coming up against things that are hard for them, and that therein lies, who they are, and completing the circle.
Great, thank you. So you have both written pieces that are oriented in landscape. Yours is so beautiful about the African landscape. It was one of the things that I just loved about your book. And for you, I'm thinking about Fool's Paradise, which was so much about the place that it took, where it happened. Can you talk about why those places, or how landscape, because for you, well, for both of you maybe, it seems like the landscape helped to shape the topic and the conflict that developed out of it. At least that's how you've told the story in the past. Anyway.
Yeah, that's my
Well, I'm not going to take too long on this, because your descriptions of the landscape in South Africa were just mind-blowing. I felt like I was there, so it's really beautiful. For me, I'm from Montana, so the landscape is everything. Going to, so in 2024, the spring of 2024, now 2 years ago, my wife treated our family to vacation at the El Conquistador Resort in Fajardo, Puerto Rico. And I got there and I was terribly, terribly uncomfortable. It was one of those like resort places where you could swim up to the bar and get a pina colada. I couldn't do that. That just wasn't my speed at all. But of course my little girls loved it. And I thought, why am am I so uncomfortable in this paradise, this beautiful place? And I thought, well, what is the thing that's sort of driving my anxiety at this moment? And I was like, oh, of course, nuclear war. So I put my characters in the resort, and then I let the world end and let them be trapped in the crucible of their suite and see what happens. And so I just sort of perched on the edge of the world like this and looking over the ocean, felt like what a precious moment it was, really, and how much I did not want it to go away, and how much I wanted that anxiety to ultimately be quelled. It was a fun vacation in the end.
Yes, I think this is something that is very important in my novel, and it's also something that probably happened quite naturally because it was a true observance of my own, a real love of the place, which is expressed, I think, in the detail that I put into the setting, because all of it feels very alive to me, and a lot of, so the setting itself, the farm, the dairy farm where I put the story, is a place that does exist, and it's where my mother grew up, and my grandmother raised her children, and I borrow her name. So my grandmother's name was Eve Hunter, and that's where the similarity ends. There are some things in the story. So I was inspired in some part by my own family and visiting that farm, which I had been to. But there's also a very interesting tradition in novelists who write about Africa, particularly white novelists who write about Africa, where they do celebrate the land. And there is a love of the land, and it's always treated as if it is something that is so unique that there's almost a spiritual relationship with it. But they don't really love the people who live on the land. And that there is this kind of colonial sort of overlay of the appreciation of the place that I also wanted to kind of represent a little bit, and I do have one of my characters make that observation in the book, that how hard it is to understand how we can love a place so much but not the people who live here. So I wanted to sort of play into that tradition a little bit, but apart from that, there is, this kind of honest knowledge of the place that I was talking about. So I could draw a lot of my own personal experience when I was putting the story together.
Great. Okay, enough from me. I'd like to open it up to the audience for questions from you for either of the writers. Yes, in the back.
Hi. Yeah. John, I would like to know how did you leave the Mormon church, and why did you become agonistic instead of atheistic?
Why did I agnostic? Okay. I'm pretty antagonistic too. My wife looked at, we're recording this tomorrow, the whole thing, and we're going to release it on the podcast platforms, and my wife is like, our address isn't on any of that. It's a good question. It's a personal question, and I think I need to be prepared to answer it. So I come from a broken home. My parents divorced when I was 5, and I ended up going to college at the University of Southern California. I was preparing to go on my mission when I started dating another Mormon girl, and I had seen the way the church had treated my mother, not that kind of woman, my mother and my sisters through the divorce, and so they took this girl aside, and I don't know what they thought of her. They thought that she had some kind of reputation, but they said, this boy is going on a mission and you're not going to spoil him. And I said, that's enough for me. And this was 1994, 95, and for me it was really scary because I thought I was going to go to hell. And about 10 years later, a lot of internet resources came out that sort of exposed a lot of what I've come to think of as the invalid truth claims of the church. It involved DNA and history, and I can tell you about that offline, but it was a big relief to see on the internet that, like, oh, so I didn't miss anything. So that's the story.
Also, probably I'm not crazy for making this choice.
Yeah.
Right? Great. Yes.
I had a question. I really liked your play, and I really liked the way you talked about the uncomfortable intersection between what you think is right personally and following, your religion, your dogma, or whatever that is. but it also got me thinking about current events in my own personal life. And it's been something that I have been able to ignore for the past 2 years when it comes to any conflict, any discussion about the Middle East. Something I've come into conflict with my own mother is the way she views it as something that's necessary. She views it as something that has to happen for like her religion or her beliefs to become true. And we've really come into conflict about it a lot of times. And my pastor too, when I go to church, they're fervently, supportive of any conflict in the Middle East. They deem it as necessary. They want it to happen. They're constantly supportive of it. And I just wanted to know, as someone who deconstructed 30 years ago, not just about Mormonism or Christianity, what do you think when religion gets used in such abhorrent ways, when belief is used to justify such cruel and horrible things?
I don't think I'm qualified to answer this question other than say that I don't love it. It's a horrific thing, and I think that's why I wrote the play. And I encourage you to write down your feelings about it too. And I think that's something that we can do. But I've been extremely frustrated with our collective inability to protect children at every level. I have children, so I've got skin in the game. I feel very strongly about that. But I wanted to talk about how we talk about what we believe and what we value, and then how we behave is very, very different. And I'm sorry that you're hearing these voices of cynicism, because I don't think that's going to lead us to anywhere good.
Wanna take a shot at that?
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, I mean, it's an enormous question and a really intelligent one, and I think it says a lot that you're even confronting. It's hard to confront things in our own families, I think, that are the norm, and I think religion does that very effectively. It establishes itself as an institution, and then it's hard to ask questions of it. And I think also a very personal answer, but growing up in South Africa at the time where things were the way they were, and I try to write about this in the book too, our government at the time was a Christian government, and they spoke about, and they used quotes from the Bible to justify apartheid. They spoke about birds of a feather flocking together, and it was therefore unquestionable because it came from this higher, but the people who brought about the change were the ones who continued to ask the questions and asked them louder and louder and louder, and didn't just accept what was original,
Great question, thank you.
You both write about pretty heavy topics, and I tend to be someone who is very anti-censorship. Have you ever had to deal with either like a producer or an executive telling you, no, you can't write that, or no, you can't talk about this subject in your life?
Not directly, but it is something we talk about a lot among my writing friends. In the last couple of years, there was a book that was written in this country called American Dirt, and I'm not sure if you guys heard the controversy about it, but it was written by a white woman with she has a Puerto Rican grandmother, but she wrote the story from the point of view of a Mexican woman who was escaping Mexico and trying to cross the border into America. And a lot of Hispanic writers were furious about it because they said that she didn't embody the experience of a Hispanic woman. So a lot of fiction writers argue that as fiction writers, we should be allowed to write whatever stories we should write or can write, because fiction is exactly that. It's about trying to experience other people's lives. And I don't see this as censorship, but I think that there is some wisdom in asking who are the right people to tell what stories. And I don't think I would ever want to try and write a black woman's experience of apartheid, because there's no way that I could ever understand what that would be like. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. It's something that I carry in my mind. I'm conscious about the kind of characters I write, because I do ask myself that question all the time, and it's a self-censorship, I suppose. Although, there's this very real example in the States right now, and it has happened not only to that writer, but to others, who were kind of put in their place. You shouldn't write gay people if, from the gay point of view or a queer point of view, if you haven't embodied that experience. So I listen to that. I kind of do wonder, I think there is an opportunity And it's necessary for not only one kind of person to be telling everybody's story, you know. So, yeah, I think that that's the way I would think about it. But I've never had the experience of anyone saying to me, you cannot do this. I just am sensitive to what I can do or should do.
I'm from the theater tradition, so I'm constantly told no for every possible reason under the sun. And I would say that if you don't want to be censored, produce your own stuff, because that's how I did it. I think to speak more directly to your question, I appreciate the idea of moral authority, and I think that's something that you have within yourself, right? Can I speak for this character, or can I make this statement? And it is a moral stance for me. I think also on both sides, or I hate the sort of binary, but on many sides of issues, there's a sort of orthodoxy that takes over, and like, shut up, shut up, shut up, you shouldn't be talking. This is not your story to tell, you shouldn't be talking. And I think that that's also harmful. So, I mean, I think if you lead with love and compassion, I think you can say what you have in your heart, and I think that's okay.
Yeah. This is for Samantha. Like, you guys kind of talked about it with like, the imagery was very vivid and it felt very real, and I just kind of wanted to know like what your process was from that. Like, are you actually trying to recreate the moment, or just kind of envisioning it and then coming about it?
I think I'm trying to recreate something. I try often to stand in a scene from within the skin of my character, and then I think about senses, and it's all about detail, and I try to tap into as many of those senses as possible and then bring them to life on the page. I believe that any kind of art like this, where you're building a world, you're in conversation with the person who's going to hear it or read it or watch it, and you have to try and bring whatever it is that your character is experiencing in the moment as much to life as you can. And I think I do that through detail and sensory experience of the place that they are. So it is quite visual for me. So sometimes I am inspired by something and it appears to me almost like a little video track. Like I see this thing like I'm watching a movie, and then I try to capture that and put it down on the page. But all the time, I'm always thinking, how would this feel if I stood behind their eyes? You know, what would it feel like to put my fingers there, or my hands there, or to smell that, or to, I'm thinking about those things.
You want to tackle it in terms of theater?
Yeah, I love that. For me, I didn't write anything full length successfully until I was almost 50. And I was commissioning a play, Seven Cousins for a Horse. I should know this play, it's amazing. It's about M.I. Phillips. You should know him, he's amazing. There's probably books on him in here. But I was working with Tammy Ryan, and she was actually staying at my home, and she was doing all this research around Connecticut about M.I. Phillips. And she said, I can't write the play until I know what the central dramatic question is. And I was like, you know, what is the central dramatic question of which you speak? Having like been a theater practitioner for 20 years. And I watched that process sort of unfold for her and the result of it. And I just remember thinking, what are some of the central dramatic questions I ponder? And I went to visit my sister on Flathead Lake in Polson, Montana, and I started thinking of this Philip Larkin poem called Obey, which you should read, it's amazing. And he talks about climbing clear of your wrong beginnings, and some may never do that. And I thought, you know, how do we climb clear of our wrong beginnings? And on the plane home, I started the play, The Flathead Lake Monster, and it just came. You know, you have your question, you have your characters, and it from that point, it becomes a very intuitive process. And I thought, well, that's just a flash in the pan. That happened once, and then it happened 2 more times. So I'm currently looking for my next central dramatic question.
Okay. Any others? We have time for a couple more.
trying to think of, because if you remember in the summer of 2025, nothing was getting in or out of the enclave, right? The trucks were stopped outside, and then Greta Thunberg was like, well, fuck the trucks, I'm going in on boat, and they arrested her. And so that's something that we explore. I'm sorry if I said the F word. We explore in the play, right? So like nothing goes in or out, like no food, no water, no medicine, no building materials, not by land, not by sea, by air. There's Iron Dome. There's no way to get in or out. And meanwhile, almost 1 million children are starving to death, and that's out of 2.1 million people in the enclave. So I thought, what would be the most ridiculous thing to try to set in there? What would be a perfectly American gesture to make? And who would be the best position to make that? Mormon ladies.
Great, go ahead.
We're kind of going off of that, and then your personal experience with the Mormon Church. I mean, I'm probably gonna have to finish the actual play to get this question, but were you using it more as like a medium for the message of the play, or is it going to be like a critique of the church itself?
I don't do message plays. Don't believe in it. If you have a message, that's not art. That's called propaganda. So if you come at your art with questions and you let the audience come to their own conclusions, that to me is art. Yes, the Mormon Church for me was the medium at which to get to this question of why can't we effectively help children in the world.
How about you? Message in your work?
Maybe inadvertently I stumble into one, but I'm definitely not trying to hammer home any kind of, moral high ground. I think that when I write and the kind of stories that I write, I'm trying to answer a lot of questions for myself, and I hope that I just encourage, that the work that I do makes people ask questions too.
Great. Yep.
I have a question too. So for both of you, I'm just curious, I would think that as writers and authors that, you develop these characters and they, I would think, start to feel a little bit like your children, and I'm curious about that relationship and how you feel kind of sending them off into the world, knowing that the way that they're received or perceived may be quite different than what you had intended or you would want for them, and so I'm just curious about that.
Especially for the author whose book is just coming out.
Yes, it is quite scary, and I've thought about this a lot because I think to begin with I felt a lot of ownership about it, and then I wondered, people don't like my work, maybe should I take it personally, or how can I be better? How can I make that, But I am now very much of the idea that we are just channels for things. They come through us, and it's not for me to get between that work and whoever needs to read it. So now she has got her own life, and I have to send her, bless her, and send her off on it, I suppose, like a child exactly, or not like a child exactly at all, but similarly, you make this thing, it kind of, it takes a very long time. But now I don't feel any ownership over the response to it. Obviously, I would love people to enjoy it in the same way that I enjoyed making it. But I do feel that now it belongs to something else. It has its own life in the world.
I love that. I think for me, this is really, because we are recording this tomorrow and I've cast it. And so a part of the theater is like you're giving the character to an actor to represent. And this was new to me, like I'd never seen this before in the theater, and this is a recording, so you just have access. A lot of actors are making their living recording stuff now. So I put out a call, it's an 8-character play. I received 1,160 submissions.
Wow.
And so I got to ask for a lot of self-takes, and it's really fun to, like, one lady, and I cast her, she's the African lady in the script, and she introduced herself in a slate and then cut and then she's back in a full-on like West African outfit, and it was amazing. But you get to see a lot of these different interpretations, and that's interesting because it's somebody else embodying it. And then from there, you don't really have any control over how people apprehend it, or you definitely know when it's wrong. But I'm really excited about the cast that I get to meet for the first time tomorrow to tell this story. I think just one other thing I want to say about the characters that you create, because it is very intuitive, right? Like you create the character and then they start speaking to you. And it doesn't feel like it comes from you. And I came to love these two ladies doing the podcast. I just love them. And I shared the play with my partner, Jason Peck, who's my co-artistic director, and he read it, and he's like, best thing you ever wrote, best thing you ever wrote. I was like, don't you love those ladies? And he's like, no, they're awful. The virtue signaling, oh no. And so that was interesting for me.
All right, I'm gonna leave it there because we gotta clear out so the library staff can go home at 8 o'clock. But thank you so much for coming and for asking these amazing questions. And please, would you thank these two wonderful guests. We're gonna come back in a couple of weeks with two more people, Jerry Johnson and the Poet Laureate of Norwalk, Katie. Oh my God, Snyder, thank you. Yes, she's terrific, so come back and join us if you want. Thanks so much for coming.
Brain is gone.